You got to have good data. You have to have good data. No matter what kind of tool you're using, no matter what kind of sales skills you have, if the data or the information you have isn't working, honey child, you ain't going to be working too well. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the importance of good data, how you make sure you find good data, what exactly is good data, why it's so important, and maybe a source or two that you can go to collect some good data. Check it out. This episode today is brought to you in part by TSE Certified Sales Training Program. If you are a sales rep or you have a sales team and you're trying to figure out ways that you can help your team improve their skills, check out TSE Certified Sales Training Program. The first 2 modules are absolutely free, and it would be an honor to have you join. This episode is also brought to you in part by Audible. Take advantage of a 30-day free trial and also a free book of your choice. Simply go to audibletrial.com/TSE. Again, audibletrial.com/TSE. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of the Sales Evangelist Podcast. I'm your host, Donald Kelly, the Sales Evangelist, and I'm so excited for another great episode. I'm so excited to be here with you today. And on this episode, we have Mr. Kyle Morris, and Kyle is the CEO and founder of SifData. Today, we're going to pick his brain, and we're going to talk about the importance of good data when it comes towards our sales efforts. Now, I'm going to tell you a secret. So Kyle and I are recording this episode for the second time. The first time wasn't his fault at all. It was my fault. I did not record the episode properly. So anyways, this is our second time chatting, and Kyle and I, we just had a good time. And I hope that you're able to gain a couple insights that can help you and your team when it comes towards good data. I wish I'd kept good data and recorded properly the first time, but he was gracious enough to come back on the show. Check out what he has to say. Let's go ahead and dive into the content. Welcome to the show, Kyle.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, man, dude, I'm excited to chat with you today because one of the things that we have learned as a seller is that you got to have good data. And if you don't have good data, you're going to be in trouble. Just put it like that. Yeah. So we're going to talk about the importance of data in sales, and I want to get your insights and all of that great stuff there. But before we hit up on all of that, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you and what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Kyle Morris. I live in Oregon. I run a company called SifData, where we have an application that sits on Salesforce to help companies track job changes. I've been doing Salesforce consulting, business operations, and been an SDR and managed a big SDR team myself. So that's kind of the lens I look at things through.
Well, dude, this is awesome. You're going to give us some great insights. But let's get started. When it comes towards data, what would you describe as data? Because there's so much that could be qualified as data. What would you describe?
Yeah, well, I would kind of take this the other side to start with and say that a lot of sales reps are very intuitive. Like they understand things well, like they're just a very intuitive person. And a lot of people take anecdotes and assume that means data. So they'll say, I closed a deal with a company like X, so therefore X is customers I want to buy that can buy our product. Or I use this tactic and it works, so therefore it's solid. We should always do it. And the plural of anecdotes is not data, right? We need to be able to sit down and objectively look at things and be able to make decisions off of that information versus just like sticking our finger to the wind and like it's blowing east, so we're going that direction. And so data is like ideally objective information about people, companies, whatever your data set is that help you make informed decisions. So an example would be identifying a total addressable market. Who are the companies that could buy our product? One of the easiest ways is to look at all the companies that have bought your product, figure out what's common among them, and then use that as a template to decide who to sell to in the future, how to expand your TAM. If you're selling to companies that have something unique about them, you might find that there's another market that also has that commonality. So an example is we track job changes. I assume recruiters, they care about job changes the same way sales reps care about their customers changing jobs. Turns out recruiters don't care the same way. So, data will get you, some data will get you pretty far, but you need to be able to talk to people as well to like fill in the gaps that data may not have for you. But the key thing to know is just because you have anecdotes that prove your point doesn't mean that represents data.
Interesting. So what do companies get wrong right now when it comes towards data as far as like, let me back up. So like a lot of sales organizations, they may have tons of information. It may not be the most effective information. We also see that many individuals don't necessarily know how to use that data, but what do we get wrong? And then I'll lead into my next question about how do we go about start capturing good data and how it can help us, or how it can help us, and then we'll talk about capturing it.
Yeah, so I would say that the two biggest problems that I see companies make are, one, the data sources that they use are inconsistent. And the second one is they have too much data that isn't actually valuable. So I'll start with the first point, which is data sources that are inconsistent. An example would be, let's say you decide your territories based off of the industry of a company, right? If they are B2B companies, they go to this person. If they're B2C, they go to another person. Well, you might get your data source from LinkedIn and Hoover's and ZoomInfo and like 10 other data providers, and they have completely different classifications of companies, and you're trying to normalize those things. And that creates a ton of problems because they might literally point at opposite things. A good example is Uber is a great company that you want to sell to that I would probably consider enterprise. Some people may consider that mid-market because they only have a couple thousand employees. But if you read their 10K, they're like, we have 1,500 employees. But if you look on LinkedIn, there's 35,000 employees because they're all the Uber drivers that drive for them. And companies will oftentimes pick and choose where they're gathering data from. And it just creates confusion for reps because they're going to go out and search for data points that prove that they're right and that whoever input this data is wrong. So an example at a company I used to work at, we were trying to decide if a company was considered enterprise, and we did that off of their revenue. So if they were over 50 million in revenue, they were considered enterprise. So what a sales rep did is he went and looked up this company that owned a bunch of restaurants, tried to figure out how many restaurants they owned based off press releases, then somehow figured out the average revenue per restaurant to back into the fact that they were enterprise and it should fall under his territory. It was a huge waste of resources and manpower and just like mental energy. And I think that happens a lot where companies are picking disparate sources, and it creates confusion for reps because they can't necessarily replicate where this data came from. And it's unclear why it falls into a specific territory. So trying to make things, one, really simple, but two, be consistent as to where you get the data. Even if it's not perfect, you're at least consistently wrong. So if you decide, Hoover's down in Brad Street is our source of data for location, for better or worse, that's what we're going to say. Our territory, if this company's based in Atlanta, it's based in Atlanta according to Hoover's, not, well, Crunchbase says it's got this and LinkedIn says that. We're just going to pick one and stick with it. So my recommendation is limit the number of resources that you use to make classifications, especially for things like territories or number of employees or revenue count, which can be really impactful to your individual reps and hurt their morale. The second thing was, so I was saying first it was too many data points. The second is data points that don't really matter. So CRMs, any CRM you log into, especially Salesforce, typically has a page layout full of information that almost none of it is used by reps. So I'd recommend, thinking back to, and you're laughing because you've been through this, you've looked at page layouts that are just garbage that don't actually add value. Like that's a burden on reps. So the mentality that I'm using now as I'm starting to think through how to like operationalize things for sales is like, you're just like a website, right? You have a website for your business. It's critical. What's above the fold is different than what's below the fold. If it's above the fold, it's really important for people to see. What's below the fold is like, hopefully people see, but as you get down to multiple pages, it's very impactful, where things are placed to how people are going to interact with it. And up at the top of every page, like you have a bunch of garbage stuff on accounts and contacts that don't really matter. And for reps, that's again a burden. It should be like, the way to think of it is either it's hell yes, it should be on the page layout, or no. It's absolutely reps need this, or let's completely remove it, because we want to streamline things. We want to make it easy. It's just like your MSA. You're not going to throw a bunch of extraneous things that the customer doesn't need to care about. You only put the most critical information onto your MSA. And in my mind, like with all the data that you have, there's got to be this like discipline around reducing the amount of noise that reps see based on the information, because if they can't actually if it won't actually change their behavior or impact how they work through a prospecting process or a deal, it should just be removed anyways, because it's not actually going to move the needle.
Yeah, interesting that you say that. Sometimes we put so much, like, I don't know why that's the case, but we just really feel that if there's a bunch of information, if there's a bunch of junk, then automatically, we're going to utilize it. But Donald Miller always says, if you confuse, you lose. And we can't confuse our reps with, I'm not going to make a decision on that. If that's the case, if I have so much things to review, to think about, then I'm just going to end up going back to what I've done before, which was guesstimation.
Yeah. And I mean, think of driving a truck built in 1965 versus a fighter jet built 2019. A truck has like a stick shift and like 2 buttons for the radio. And it's so simple to get from point A to point B. Put a random person in a fighter jet and there's a million buttons that they're not going to understand. And as a sales rep, you've got to be able to execute, and you can't be fighting the fighter jet when you're really just trying to drive a 65 Chevy. So, removing, you also have to think of, if you have more data points on the page layouts that reps are consuming, that's more stuff that you as an operator have to maintain. Like, you have to make sure that it is good, because as soon as a rep sees a data point that isn't right, you say that Uber's only got 500 employees, but you looked everywhere and it's 5,000 or 200,000. The rep immediately discounts all that information, and then the CRM becomes less valuable and less trusted. And then they're going to start, again, using anecdotes to make decisions versus the data that you provided, because it's just become stale or not right to begin with.
Hey, it's that time, and we're going to take a quick break. But when we get back, Kyle and I are going to pick up where we left off. He's going to continue to share with you the importance of good data, how you go about it, and some ideas that you can take advantage of today to make sure your data is on point. You're listening to the Sales Evangelist podcast, and I'm your host, Donald Kelly, the Sales Evangelist. In my beginning efforts as a sales rep, man, it was tough. I was begging for money. I didn't know what I was doing, and I had a really difficult time. The company I was working with, well, they were smart enough to put me through some sales training, and then I saw a hockey stick in my performance. One of the cool things was each week we went to this group training program, and I was able to fortify my skills and improve, and next thing you know, I started to really do well. I figured whenever I have my own opportunity, I'll educate sales reps like that. So we created TSE Certified Sales Training Program. It's to help sellers of all levels. If you are trying to figure out what are the best strategies to find prospects, the first section will teach you that. If you know what to do to find the prospects, but you're having a difficult time crafting the right questions or getting them to say yes to your demonstration, well, we have a section devoted just to educate you on building value. Or even if you have an amazing way of finding the problem, but you're just not delivering it right, or perhaps you're just not getting them to say yes often enough, we have a section devoted just for closing. If you want to test it out for yourself, you can take advantage of the first 2 modules absolutely free. Go to thesalesevangelist.com/free course. Again, thesalesevangelist.com/free course. It would be an honor to have you and your team join. This episode is also brought to you in part by Audible. One of the cool things is that I dissect and devote my time to educating myself as a sales leader, as a business owner, and also as an individual. My wife and I are expecting our first little guy later this year, and one of our friends recommended BabyWise. So I'm listening to that book. It's an amazing book, by the way. Besides talking about sales, I also love talking about space. So if there's anything I can learn about space, hey, I'll check that out. So there's a book I'm listening to as well called Beyond Earth. And of course, there are the sales education books. I have plenty of those in my arsenal. One of them I recommend you check out is Bob Berg's book, The Go-Giver. Now, you can take advantage of Audible. They are giving the TSE audience a free book of your choice. You can choose one of those or one of your own, absolutely free. And then they'll give you 30-day access to Audible. You can't beat that offer. I would recommend you go check it out. Go back to the show notes or simply go to audibletrial.com/TSE. Again, audibletrial.com/TSE. You're going to go on a whole new adventure now. Good stuff. Hey, we're back, and we're going to pick up where we left off. Kyle is going to continue to share with you his thoughts on how you can make sure you guys are having great data in your firm, and also some of the resources and tools that you should be aware of that you can utilize in this effort to maintain good data. So understanding that, when we talked a little bit more, we kind of talk about how to use it in a little bit, but if you are a sales manager, how would you encourage your reps to utilize data more effectively? Like, now we have good data. What are some things that this rep could do, or your sales rep, to make sure they're performing effectively? Am I making sense on that?
Yeah, kind of. So correct me if I'm starting to answer the wrong question, but essentially what I see happen in addition to all those janky fields on a page layout is they'll put all these fields and expect reps to fill them in. So it's a really simple thing from a sales rep or executive position to say, you know what, we just want to know what every CRM our customers and prospects use. So we're just going to have sales reps just fill that in before the deal closes. Well, it starts to create this burden on reps. And if it doesn't actually move the needle, it's a waste of time. And they're just going to fill in whatever they've got to do to push the deal forward. So it's really critical that the reps trust that whatever fields are on the page layout are actually really important. Because if they're not bought into populating the data themselves, because there are certain situations where you need the rep to fill in that information. Like you just can't get it from LinkedIn or Hoovers or wherever. And if the rep doesn't trust that this is actually valuable, they're not going to do it. And you've got to make the process one, simple and not complex and easy for them to interact with. So I would remove as much as you can from the page layout, put only what the reps really care about, and just encourage or kind of force them to fill out those things. But you can't, as a manager, you can't cry wolf and say, oh, this is important. And so is this. And so is this. And so is this. It's not everything can be important. You can't have 10 tier 1 problems and no tier 2s. They've all got to like fit sequentially. And it's so easy to cry wolf in that situation.
Oh my goodness. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes, it is.
Yeah. Every sales rep's been in the position where like, oh, I got to fill this out again. Like no one even cares. No one ever even reads it. Like, why would I do this? And
why?
Nobody's alone. Yeah. I used to have a rule at a company I was at where I was doing operation stuff. People would come to me and say, we need a new field for this. Like we need to track this information. My response was, then you need to find 2 fields we can remove. I don't care where they come from, but if you're going to add one thing, we got to remove 2. And that'll only go on for so long, but it really gets them to think critically about, is this actually important? Is it more important than these 2 fields that I'm going to ask him or her to remove? Like it's getting people in the mindset of like, look, we should minimize the data. Just like as a sales rep, your words are like your currency. You've only got so much you can put out there. And as an operator, you've got to make sure that the process is easy. Your customers are the sales reps or the customer success reps. You've got to make their lives easier. You can't just burden and burden and burden. You've got to find ways to break barriers down just as much as you're building things up.
Oh man, so true on that. Now, the final part here, you see, we kind of mentioned a little bit more about capturing the effective data. We talked about you can, utilize different sources, make sure it's one source, one consistent source. But does it ever make sense to have our sales rep to be a part of that data capturing process, or should that be a role of somebody else?
I am very biased towards like you should have very specific roles for very specific people. Not that like a sales rep can't set his own meetings and only SDRs can do that, but it's like your sales reps are on average, if you look at Bay Area tech companies, 200 plus K a year. And if that person is doing data entry, man, I'll do it for 100K a year and I'll get some people abroad to do it for you. Like we'll both make a bunch of money here. But, a sales rep is going to be most effective at building rapport, identifying pain and need, and closing deals. That's what they're best at. And an SDR is best at identifying, potential reasons to reach out and generating meetings. And data entry people are fantastic at being disciplined about getting data into the system that's accurate and up to date. Like, why would you try to switch their roles? You would never go to a data entry person and say, can you try to close this deal or work with red lines? Just the same way you shouldn't go to a sales rep and say, hey, can you go find, 10,000 Crunchbase links for me? Like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, people are compensated for the value that they provide. And obviously closing a deal is a much higher value task than entering some point of data. And so you find people that fit the value that they provide with their costs. So, there are plenty of people on Upwork. There's plenty of job boards for people that are either abroad or want lower skill work that are down to do that data entry, and they'll do it consistently and better. Because a sales rep, when you mix in data entry with closing deals, the first thing that's going to go from being disciplined about is like, I don't have time to fill in this data. I've got these deals to close. I got a quota ahead of me, and doing data entry doesn't align with my KPI. So I really encourage people to separate concerns and say, look, your data entry people do that, SDRs do this, and reps do that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100% there, man. The last thing you want is overpay somebody to do something that they don't they have no real reason to be doing. And that's just it's going to be ineffective in the long run. And I think sometimes businesses make that mistake, right? Where they're thinking they're being efficient, where they're thinking like the sales rep can do this. He's already going to be on this website. She's already going to be doing some of the stuff. Why don't they just collect that? But think about the brain change. If I'm doing that as a sales rep, I have to change my whole process of thinking now to go back and think about doing it from this standpoint and doing it this way, the way that you have it. And it's just going to throw me off. And the amount I get done limits. Yeah.
Imagine you had to take notes on our podcast while you're recording the podcast. You're flexing different muscles at the same time, and it becomes challenging to be good at both. And from a sales rep, like, they're consistently like trying to empathize and build rapport and do all these things. And you're immediately trying to change their mental process into just collecting data, which can be tedious and hard and very tough to be like focused on for long periods of time. And you're trying to have them switch back and forth. And sales reps, I think, stereotypically are bad at those types of things. So you're trying to take people who aren't good at being like very laser focused on a specific task and being disciplined over and over and over, and you're just trying to force them to do it all the time. So there are plenty of people who are better at that, and you might as well let them do it, because there's a lot of opportunity costs, because every minute your seller isn't selling is money down the drain. So if you're having them do something that isn't getting them closer to closing deals, or building mutual action plans, or whatever it makes sense to do, you're missing out.
Is there anything else that we should be aware of when it comes towards good data for our sales team that we haven't already hit on?
I definitely mentioned pick a single data source. That's one that I like a lot. Another one is so two that I would use would be come up with some sort of a process to refresh the data. So, it's so common for a company to say, we've got 100,000 accounts in Salesforce. We don't know which ones are good. We don't know which ones are bad or up to date. There's not a given process for it. So a really simple one is, let's say you have a process to refresh all the key data, call it website, Alexa rank, employees, and revenue every year. That's just your cadence that you're going to do on the first.
Yeah.
So the tactical way I'd do it is I would have a date on an account called like data refreshed on. And then your workers, let's say you hire some folks overseas to do this on Upwork, they would log into Salesforce, see all the accounts that have had that date not updated since the first of this or in the last 365 days, and just have them go through and refresh that date as they clean up all that data. And then all of a sudden you've just got a list of accounts, that they're kind of always refreshed. So that's one tactic that I would use, is like pick those fields, have a specific person work through them, and have a date that tracks when those fields were updated. There are lots of ways you could audit that, but that's probably the most simple one. Picking a single data source is a big one, but I would say, having some sort of a process for it, because it happens much more ad hoc, where maybe a rep goes and updates the annual revenue, but it's not consistent from company to company, and it just creates a lot of confusion for everybody. The second one is duplicates. This is a huge problem across essentially every CRM that I've ever seen, there are tons of duplicate contacts and duplicate accounts. And barring some exceptions, essentially duplicate accounts are any two companies with the same website, because that is you can't have two companies with the same website. They're either one company or they're not. And you should prevent, the analogy I use is, you've got a polluted lake. It's filled with crummy water. What's the first thing you do is you start filtering it. That's the equivalent of having some people clean up these duplicates. The problem with that is, if you don't have a way to stop new duplicates from being put into the dirty lake, as soon as you get it clean, you're going to have to start back over again and go through that whole process. So before you start cleaning things, you have to stop it. And essentially what I've done in organizations I've worked in is, you cannot insert or edit a contact if it's a duplicate. Same with an account. You can never insert one and if it's a duplicate, because you got to clean those things up. And that is essentially the starting point. Then from there, once you've clearly got that locked down, people aren't inserting new dupes, then you start to clean them up. Whatever process you want to use for that, that's a whole podcast by itself.
Dude, love it, man. Yeah, you're right on that, because listen, that duplicate or, the multiple accounts, man, that could be my commission, right? You could start working on something and then somebody else go work on it. And
for sure.
Next thing you know, who started it? I've had questions asked my Facebook group about that.
Yeah. It's more mental overhead on reps. They're having to dig around the system because they don't trust that they're the only one that's got the op, or they're trying to find ways to prove that they were the first one to create it. It's wasted energy that could be focused towards closing.
Oh, for sure, man. Well, if there is one major takeaway you'd like folks listening to this episode to walk away with, what's that one major piece of advice?
Yeah. And I emphasized this a couple times early on, is that anecdotes don't equal data. That's a big one. Is a lot of companies just assume that because I have information that reps have told me, I have to trust that it's accurate. Like, anecdotes aren't data. And the second one is pick a single source of truth and stick with it. There's no perfect data source out there. That's a really critical one. LinkedIn's not perfect. Hoovers isn't perfect. DiscoverWork is not perfect. None of them are, but at least be consistently imperfect. That way people can kind of trust what they're working with. So I'd say that's it.
Awesome, man. Well, dude, man, I thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today. If folks want to get in touch with you to learn a little bit more about you and what you do, what's the best way for them to go about doing so, Kyle?
Yeah, follow me on LinkedIn or shoot me an email, kyle@sifdata.com. I think I'm the only Kyle Morris at SifData that exists out there, so it should be pretty easy to find me. And we'll link back to your organization as well so they can get connected with all the details that you guys have to offer. Yeah, thanks so much. Hey, man, it's a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you. Yeah, sure thing. I'm telling you, Kyle came, he saw, he conquered, and he delivered some amazing stuff. If you are concerned about the data in your company, if you feel like you are getting some of these old stuff from 7 years ago, things that are talking about people don't ever work in a company anymore, I want you guys to check out what Kyle and his team are doing. We have some information in the show notes. You can find it at thesalesevangelist.com/word episode number 1131. Again, thesalesevangelist.com/word episode number 1131.
Or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, just swipe up on a cover art. You'll see some information down below. You can click on the links and get connected with Kyle. But be sure to tell him that you heard him on the Sales Evangelist podcast. I know he'll be blown away. I'll be blown away. And we'll all be so happy that you enjoyed this episode. Of course, because it's good stuff, right? Now, I also want you to do something for me. I want you guys to check out our friends. Check out the people over at Audible. They have a free offer. You can't beat it. It's a free book of your choice. And then also a 30-day trial of Audible. All you have to do is go to audibletrial.com/TSE or swipe up on a cover art. We have the information below. You can also check out our program, TSE Certified Sales Training Program. We would love to have you and your team join. Check out the first 2 modules absolutely free. Find all the details in the show notes again. I share this stuff with you because I want to help you. We want to help you find the best tools that's going to help you to perform. We want you to find more ideal customers. We want you to build stronger value in your conversation. We want you to close more deals. But most importantly, we want to challenge you each and every single day to go out and do big things. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our episode today. I know you could be doing so many other things, but you took time to come here, and I appreciate that. If you haven't done so already, I ask that you go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. That way you can get notified whenever we have a new episode. You can also share it with your friends and family and anyone you know that could benefit from listening to an awesome sales show. And review on Apple Podcast or Google Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you listen to find shows like this. It goes a long way when someone is searching for a podcast and they see that other people are loving it. Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to do that. This episode today was produced by myself and the Sales Podcast Network. It was edited and mixed together by the one and only Jershon O'Bale. Our content writer and show note creator is Shannon Rasmussen. You can find audio credits to this and all of our episodes in the show notes. And as always, I am your host, your coach, your mentor, your guide down the sales journey, Mr. Donald C. Kelly, the Sales Evangelist. Sales Podcast Network.